So how many people, like, when I walked in said, oh shit, it's a priest? That's part of what I like about this, is just walking in unannounced. So 3 years ago, my then 22-year-old, dreadlocked, tattooed, I'm more of a Buddhist daughter, came into 2 tickets to Burning Man. And she decided to invite her then 53-year-old, West Point graduate, Army veteran, Episcopal priest dad to go with her. So, which for me was an offer I could not refuse. And we stayed at a camp of, she goes to lots of music festivals, and we stayed with the people she camps with at music festivals formed a camp called Perky Parts. So we camped at Camp Perky Parts. And the big thing, in addition to the costumes, of course, that you need, and the tent and all of that stuff, I had to figure out what my gift was going to be, because Burning Man is a gift-giving economy. And in addition to our camp gift, which was great parties, I wanted to figure out what I had to offer that had integrity to me as a priest. Like, I'm a priest. This is who I am. And what could I give other people that would have integrity for me, but also be respectful for other people, and be able to be accepted by Christians and atheists and Wiccans and whomever. Like, what would that possibly look like? And my daughter suggested holy water. Like, I could sprinkle people with holy water, and I thought, maybe I could take some wafers out and celebrate communion, bless the wafers, and then ride around passing out Jesus on the playa. And then what I did was what I ended up doing for my gift was to offer a blessing. And what I'd like to do is bless you with that blessing, but I want to do it in the form that I offered it on the playa, which means I need a person who would like to be blessed. Okay. Okay. And this is, so I would just walk up to a random person, say, hi, can I bless you?
Yes.
And could you tell me your name?
V.
V, I'm Brian.
Nice to meet you, Brian.
And then I would have oil that had been blessed, and I would bless you. So I'm gonna touch you as I anoint parts of your body. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
And your name again?
V.
V. V. The world now is too dangerous and too beautiful for anything but love. I bless your eyes so you see God in everyone. I bless your ear so you hear the cry of the poor. I bless your lips so you speak nothing but the truth with love. I bless your hands so that everything you receive and everything you give is a sacrament. I bless your feet so you run to those who need you. And may your heart be so opened, so set on fire, that your love changes everything. Amen. Now think about how awesome that would be. Just go up to people and say, can I bless you? And it's one thing to do it on the playa, right, where people are open and ready for crazy shit, right? And I've talked about this in my church afterwards. I came back and the whole congregation was dying to know Like, what did the priest do at Burning Man? So I preached about it and included this blessing, and one young woman in my congregation started doing it on the streets of Sacramento. Just going up to people and saying, "Hi, can I bless you?" And then blessing them, kissing their feet. And often she would do it with homeless people who would sort of be passing through the alley behind her place. I'm here because I believe that your love can change everything. I'm particularly, pressured isn't the right word. There's an urgency. Because right now the world's going batshit crazy. Right? I heard an amen. Like all of you just said amen. And we have the opportunity, we have the obligation to love the world into wholeness. And for our love to change everything. And what I want to do is tell you a little bit that hopefully can help you in your vocation and your ministry of loving the world into wholeness. And I'm going to be speaking from my tradition as a Christian. I'm not here to convert you. I need to say that because Christians have been dicks. So, and I've done a lot of interfaith work, and I think it works best when people are authentically themselves, but not feeling like other people have to be that, right? So I'm going to be authentically myself and talk from my perspective, what I've learned and what I believe to be true. But it's just my perspective, and I'm expecting that for some of you there will be bits that will be helpful for you. Okay? So that's my disclaimer. A little bit about myself. I was not raised in the church. My father was in the Air Force. We moved around all the time. They were not church-going people. When I was 12 years old, my Air Force colonel dad came home from work one day and declared that the family needed to learn to meditate. I think he must have read something in Popular Science magazine about the physical benefits of meditation, because that's who he was. So the 6 of us, 4 kids and 2 parents, hopped in the Rambler station wagon and drove to Amherst, Massachusetts to the Transcendental Meditation Center, which was this White House with a picture of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi on every wall. And we were given our mantra and learned to meditate. And after that, meditation was part of our chores. And Mom would say before dinner, "Have you meditated yet?" And we'd say, "Oh no," and we run down to the basement. Thing for 20 minutes and then go back. After a year we moved and we got out of the habit as a family of meditating, and I'm a horribly undisciplined person. And I go in and out of seasons where I meditate a lot and it's important to me, and seasons where I don't. But what it did for me as this ADHD hyperactive boy was it gave me this quiet place inside me that I knew I could access. And that's what I had. That and occasionally an innate sense of being connected to something else. Then, so my wife and I started dating when we were 15. And I went to West Point because that's where my girlfriend wanted to go to college. And while I was at West Point, I was going to church because my girlfriend sang in the choir and I would earn points with my girlfriend if I went to church. And while I was there, I had an experience. I had a conversion experience, and what's important about that, I don't need to go into all of the details, but one thing about that matters is my experience was an experience of being loved by God, even while I was giving God the finger. And so my primal foundational experience of God is love, not in response to me being better. But God, there's just this power of love, and my belovedness existed sort of beneath my jerkiness, right? I was this, so I had this core experience of God being love. And it was in the context of a Christian service, it was in the context of teaching from Jesus, and so I got hooked on Jesus, hooked on the Bible. I was hungry for more and more and more to understand this God of love, so I got very involved in the church. And when I graduated and started going to more and more church, I had this cognitive dissonance between my experience of God as love and some of the things I was hearing from Christians. Like, if you're not a Christian, you're going to burn in hell. Well, that didn't seem very, lovey to me. And particularly since my experience was being loved even when I wasn't a Christian and while I was being a jerk. So, because of this cognitive dissonance, and because my spiritual path, I was at this point in my life where I needed to know if I was on the right spiritual path. And I think I was too embarrassed to ask my priest. So I decided to go to seminary. Because I figured I'll go to seminary, I'll sit in the back row, listen to what they're saying. And if it fit, then I would give my life to it. If it didn't fit, I was going to find a different path. But I was at that moment, right, where I needed to know. So I got out of the Army, went to seminary, and really found my spiritual home. I found my theological home at seminary. I found my vocational home after I was a priest for a few years. I realized this was really what I was called to do, what I was called to be. Then a couple other things on my journey. 20 years ago now, I wanted to add a physical practice. I wanted to add a physical spiritual practice. And so I went to a Tibetan Buddhist and asked her to teach me yoga. And I wanted yoga in the context of a spiritual practice. So I wanted to learn from someone that was either Hindu or Buddhist, for whom yoga was part of their prayer life, not just the asana part, right? Mm-hmm. So I found this amazing young woman, Pilar Tumalo. She taught me yoga, and then she and I would teach her about Christianity, she would teach me about Buddhism. We opened it up to the community, we invited the community into our conversations, and then I started doing more and more teachings with Buddhist monks. And that's how I got connected here at Zuda. The other thing is I was very involved in Sacramento and in the Episcopal Church in the fight for marriage equality. So a lot of my 15 years of my ministry was significantly focused on marriage equality. And now I've been doing a lot of work at Trinity Cathedral, where I'm the priest, with racism stuff, having conversations about race and learning about race, learning our history about race, learning about white privilege, all of that kind of stuff. That and Burning Man. I've now gone for 3 years. I started a camp of one last year. I did a sort of trial run of a camp of one, and I'm starting an official theme camp this year. The name of the theme camp is Religious as Fuck. Anyone's allowed to camp with us as long as they are religious as fuck. And that was sort of my response when people would say I'm spiritual but not religious. I would say, well, I'm religious as fuck. Because to me, there's value in being religious. So that was that's my way of saying it's important to me to be religious, but I'm not religious in the way you think religious people are religious, because I'm religious as fuck. So, anyway, I just like saying that. And the other thing is, my wife is a chaplain in the Army, and she just got stationed in Encino, California, for a 3-year tour. So I am leaving my job here in 5 weeks and moving to Encino to be with her. So this is my last chance at Zuda while I'm living here. I'm happy to drive or fly in the future. Okay, so that's my introduction about me. My name's Brian Baker, Episcopal priest, Trinity Cathedral. Okay, we're created for joy. Right? Can I get an amen? Amen! We are created for joy. We are created to be in holy communion with one another and with ourselves and with God. And we're not in holy communion with ourselves and with one another and with God. And I think there are two big obstacles that come to my mind. One, is people. People are jerks. And the other is life. Life is hard. And what I want to do is talk about how to move beyond those obstacles. Beyond the obstacles of people are jerks and the obstacle of life is hard. And I want to start with the people are jerks part. And this is going to be a talk that focuses on countering our judginess. In case some of you might be judging. Just in case. And I want to start with two premises. One is every human is a beloved child of God, deserving of and capable of love. Every human is a beloved child of God, deserving of and capable of love. Okay, now I want you to put into your consciousness the person you love to hate. And think every human is a beloved child of God, deserving of and capable of love. That's one. One thing I believe to be true. The other thing I believe to be true is that every human on the face of the earth is paralyzed by fear, by insecurity, by judginess. Right? We are all like messed up and broken. There's some, like every single human is paralyzed by our own fears and our own anxieties and our own woundedness and our brokenness and our addictions. And we are destined to disappoint one another. Now that's a really important thing to know. It's really helpful if you're married and you want to stay married. That you realize that and this is this is not negative. Like this is not an opportunity to judge someone for their brokenness. It's rather an invitation to enter the real world where we are all struggling. We're just trying to make it through, right? We're struggling and struggling and struggling. And if we realize that our partner and the people in class with us are struggling just as well, we're just trying to make it through. It allows us, and this is not negative, it invites us to lower our expectations. Right? So when someone is doing the thing, you're going, oh, they're doing the thing. That's the way they're broken. Right? That's just their thing of how they're broken and how they act out of their own paralysis and their brokenness. So one of the benefits of being realistic in how we look at other people and their brokenness is it invites us to have a more compassionate, open, loving heart toward other people. The other, and this is equally important, it invites you to set boundaries. Right? You expect the people in your life are going to hurt you. You expect corporations to be greedy. Right? So we set boundaries. And you're not judgy about it. Right? It's not like if you violate this boundary, you're a bad person. It's like, this is a boundary. And if we're going to be in a relationship, you need to know that this is a boundary that I have. And if this boundary is violated, then we can't be in a relationship. It's not that I don't love you. It's not that I think you're a bad person. It's just this is my boundary. Those two things, right? And if we can set boundaries and keep a loving, open, supple heart, you just happen to be broken in a way that I can't be in relationship. And I love you. And I can't be in relationship. Right? Or, and I love you, and this is not okay. I can't do this. And you can choose not to do this, or choose to do it, but I just can't, right? Do you see how, and to be able to do this without the judginess. I'm going to talk when my daughter was born, and I held my first child in my hands, something changed. I felt a love that was so deep that I knew it would never end. No matter what she did, I couldn't stop loving her. And believe me, she did a lot. But her childhood cruelties and her misdeeds never defined her. I never looked at her through the lens of what she did wrong. I could only see her as this beautiful child, beloved, deserving of and capable of love. And I wonder, why don't I look at myself that way?
Amen.
And why don't we look at other people that way? I know for me, it's the mistakes that stick. I will be having a conversation with a group of people, and I will say 10 amazing, funny things and one stupid thing.
Amen.
And I will leave that conversation going, I am so stupid. And we do that to other people like that. Right? Someone cuts us off in traffic, and we don't say, oh, I wish they'd made a different driving choice. We think, I'm an idiot. And in a moment, we sort of move them into this category that's not even human, right? And it's not that we disagree with someone, it's that we disdain. And that's the thing. It's like moving into disdaining. And we disdain so quickly. Now you can make the argument that that is the fatal flaw in the human condition. There are a couple other candidates, but you can make the argument that that's the fatal flaw. We'll talk about others. And I believe that that is the point of the story of Adam and Eve. The story of Adam and Eve is this creation myth that was written thousands of years ago to answer one question: what went wrong? And in this creation myth, God creates the first humans and says, enjoy. Enjoy everything here. Just don't do one thing. Because if you do this one thing, everything's going to go wrong. And the one thing is don't eat the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of blank. Something, right? Now what's the something? What is the something that if humans eat the fruit of the knowledge, right? If humans are going to get this particular knowledge, it's going to make everything go wrong. Is it like the knowledge, if you're a Puritan, maybe it's the knowledge of sex, or if you're a pacifist, maybe it's the knowledge of violence or war? But what the author chose when the author crafted this story was the knowledge of good and evil. And then in the story, the next thing they do, right? They bite the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The next thing they do is they look at their own pure, unclothed form, and they go like this. They judge themselves as evil. Isn't that something? They judge themselves as evil. And then the story tells us that every day God would walk through the garden, and every day Adam and Eve would run up and say, "Hi God," they'd hold hands and walk and chat and stuff. And this next day, like God is walking through the garden, and they don't come out to greet God. And God says, "Where are you?" And they say, "We're hiding in the bushes." And God says, "Why are you hiding in the bushes?" And they say, "Well, we can't come out because we're naked." And God's heart breaks. Who told you we're naked? Who told you something was wrong with that? Adam blames Eve. Eve blames the serpent. And here we are. Practically unable to talk to one another. Because we're so busy judging. Judging ourselves, judging other people. Now, there are some things. Okay, so step one. Step one is know there's a problem. Okay, there's a problem. Now, there are some things you can do to help me sort of turn down the volume of that inner critic that is so quick to cut yourself down, someone else down. So one is simply to pay attention to your thoughts. Like notice when you leave the conversation and you're going, "I'm such an idiot, I'm such an idiot." Like first just notice, go, "Wow, I am such a jerk to myself." And just notice it. And then the other thing you can do is replace it. Right? Well, first know that you're not that voice. Right? You're not your thoughts. And you're not that inner critic. You could say, if you want, "That's the devil." Right? Or it's just not okay. I should just shut up. You can replace it with a mantra. You can replace it with a prayer. I was giving a class, I was doing this kind of talk to Buddhists, and one of them afterwards came up to me and said, "Every time that voice comes in my head, I say a Hail Mary." I was like, "Well, that's pretty cool." Right? So one is just to notice. Notice when you're doing it and say, "That's not, you're not the boss of me. That's not the voice of truth." And maybe replace it with a mantra. The other thing is to realize that everybody on the face of the earth is doing the best they can, given the way they're paralyzed. I have a friend whose Granny Barb used to say, "Everyone's doing the best they can, and sometimes their best is pretty shitty." Sometimes my best is pretty shitty. But it's my best. Like, I am trying. And if we would give people the benefit of the doubt, that they're trying. I mean, this is as good as they are capable of being. And, I think it's a miracle that we are as good as we are, given how messed up we are. Right? But you don't want... Part of what you're trying to do is to not let the cruelty of other people rob you of your ability to love. You need to keep your ability to love there. So we're looking at strategies of ways of like turning down that judging mind, realizing that they're doing the best they can given with what they're struggling with. You can, this one's from Jesus. Pray for your enemies. And don't just pray that, they change their mind. They change to become someone that's better. Pray that they be free of suffering and the causes of suffering. Because if you pray for your enemies, and Jesus actually took it a step further and said, "Love your enemies." If you do that, eventually you have no enemies. That. Let go of your need to be right. Like, it is not important that you win Thanksgiving dinner. It's more important than you're loving than being right. And that's something that, like, marriage helps teach. You know, if you want to stay married, it's more important that you love than be right. And that's part of, I was at a TED Talk in South Lake Tahoe. And this one guy was giving the talk, and he was talking about global warming. And he said, the problem with progressives, with liberals, is they want to be right. Like, they want people to realize that global warming is real. So they, like, turn into jerks trying to convince people that global warming is real, when instead what this guy was proposing was give up the need to be right. Just let them know that you save money. Right? There are all kinds of reasons for doing the right environmental thing, and if we would stop, like, throwing stones over being right, and just say, you know, you would save money, or these are other reasons for doing it, but there's something in us that wants, and this came up a lot when, one of the biggest questions I was asked during the marriage equality time was, what do I say to the person that disagrees with me? Like, how do I convince them that they're wrong? And I was like that for a while until I realized that it's just not my job to, you know, so anyway, give up, like, let go of the need to be right and sort of win the right thing. Not right. Okay, now here's the big one. The antidote to judging is forgiveness. That's the sort of primary muscle that you exercise if you want to become less judging, is to forgive. And one of the things, you know, forgiveness is central to Jesus' teachings. And it's central to the Lord's Prayer, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. He taught us about it. While he was being crucified, he said, he prayed to God, Father, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing. Like, he forgave the people that were crucifying him. And then after the resurrection, what he said to his disciples, he said, receive God's Spirit, he blew on them. And then he said, if you forgive the sins of any, they're forgiven. If you retain the sins of any, they are retained. He told them that they have the power. You have the power. You have the power to free people from their sins. And you have the power to hold them in their sins. What it looks like to hold someone in their sins is this. 3 years ago, you hurt me. And ever since then, I haven't seen you. I only see you through the lens of how you hurt me. Right? And that's who you are. You are bound into that. And there's something like cosmic in that. One of the things the other thing Jesus says was, what you bind on earth is bound in heaven, what you loose on earth is loosed in heaven. Which means it matters cosmically. If you go around binding people in their sins, it matters. More than just in your own head. It sort of matters in the energy of the universe. And if you free people from their sins, it matters. Now, I think when Jesus said that, it was law of physics. It was saying, you have this power. But I don't think he was giving people the choice. Like, if you're going to follow me, you're going to free people from their sins. If we're going to be these agents of love, then we're going to free people from their sins. And what it means to free someone, you know, Desmond Tutu says, forgiveness is not an act of mercy. Forgiveness is remembering the truth about someone. Forgiveness means no matter how you hurt me, or no matter how I perceive being hurt by what you did,
You are a beloved child of God, deserving of and capable of love. I'm remembering the truth of who you are. You're a beloved child of God. You're deserving of love, and you're capable of love. That's another thing Desmond Tutu said, is don't ever call someone a monster. Don't ever rob them of their ability to be capable of love, because if you do, you let them off the hook. Like if you define them as monster, then that's all they ever have to be. Forgiveness is remembering the truth about someone. Forgiveness means, it doesn't mean, and this is where it gets really tricky, it doesn't mean allowing, like if someone's hurting me, to forgive them doesn't mean to allow them to keep hurting me. What it means is that juice that comes up in me, that sends them to hell in my heart, right? That thing that moves me up to the high ground and moves them into this, like, you're such an asshole, right? It's that thing. It's letting go of that thing. It's letting go of that thing inside of you that holds people in hell, that condemns them to hell, that disdains. It's letting go of that. And seeing them for who they really are, which is a beloved child of God, deserving of and capable of love, who also happens to be really paralyzed and will disappoint me and hurt me, with whom I need to have boundaries, because we all need boundaries. Right? So this all gets together. And forgiveness, like you can forgive someone and put them in jail. It's just while they're in jail, you're not wishing they get bad food, or you're not like continuing to condemn them or twist the knife or whatever, right? Boundaries, it's like boundaries without the juice. Let's pause there. I want to see what, like I've just dumped a lot of stuff. First give me an amen. Amen! Thank you. They don't do this in my church, by the way. They're much too quiet. Let me pause there for questions or comments or thoughts. Yes?
What was the quote? Who was it, right? That forgiveness is not an act of mercy?
Desmond Tutu.
Just like the name.
Desmond Tutu is the former Archbishop of South Africa. And he was very involved in he was the sort of primary spiritual driver in the post-apartheid Truth and Reconciliation Commission. He's sort of in my church, in the Anglican Church, in the Episcopal Church. He's our Dalai Lama. Desmond Tutu is our sort of prime, sort of compassion rock star. Yes.
I guess I'd want to say that you definitely shattered my perception of what a priest could be like. I went to Catholic school like most of my life, so definitely when I did see you, I was like, oh great, here we go. It's time for our baptism, I guess. It was really cool. Thank you.
You're welcome. Someone, yes.
I would describe myself as someone who's spiritual but not religious, so it's not every day I have an opportunity to speak with a priest. And I was just curious about forgiveness. It's something that I work on a lot, and it's really hard. And I wonder if you have any advice as far as the act of trying to forgive and making it to actual forgiveness.
Okay.
Bridge that.
Yeah.
My question was the same, but just to maybe advance on it, and you can answer at the same time. Does the forgiveness, is it like, say I was mad at him, I have to forgive him personally, or is this taking in our heart space forgiving? Or does it?
So, Desmond Tutu wrote with his daughter a great book on forgiveness. And I think maybe the title is The Book of Forgiveness. That's the Book of Forgiving, or it's something like that. It's like the most obvious title you can think of. That's the title of this book. And he talks about 4 stages of forgiveness. And the first stage is telling the story. And this is like telling the story to yourself, telling the story to someone else. This is not necessarily engaging the person that hurt you, right? The first step is telling the story. The second step is naming the hurt. So it's like one step beyond telling the story, but this is why it mattered. This is why it hurt me. So it's asking you to dig a little deeper than just, this person did this, aren't they a jerk? Right? This person did this, and this is why it hurt me. And then it's not, and the third step is forgiving. And one of the things that Desmond Tutu says that I would echo is that it may take you 10 years to get to step 3. Right? This is not a quick and easy thing. And this is hard for every human. It's not hard just for you, right? and part of the invitation is to forgive yourself for not being able to forgive. You know, I had someone in 20, 25 years ago who did something that hurt me deeply. And for years, if I was eating lunch in a restaurant and that person walked in the restaurant, it would ruin my life. Now, like, I knew all this stuff about forgiveness, right? I knew then mostly what I know now, and I still couldn't forgive. And part of what I did, part of a step, is to pray for the person, right? And don't pray that they fall in a hole. You pray that they live a long life free from suffering and the causes of suffering. You try and train your mind to look at them in the way that I look at my daughter. You know, to look at them as the way God sees them, as this beloved child who's paralyzed. But it takes a long time. And then eventually, with this guy who hurt me, you know, eventually, years later, it didn't hurt me so much when he walked in. And then years after that, I became grateful for the journey. And we now live very far away, but I would not mind the opportunity if I was at a restaurant and he came in to sit down and thank him. Not because I think what he did right is right, but because it's an important part of me growing up. He became an angel in my life. Now that's the forgiving step. And that forgiving step can happen. I've never spoken with this guy since then, right? That forgiving step has to do with you. It's the fourth step that Desmond Tutu talks about, and that is deciding to either release or renew the relationship. You can forgive someone and never be in a relationship with them. You just choose to release the relationship. This is not a relationship that's healthy for you. I'm going to release the relationship. Or you can renew the relationship. And he doesn't say restore the relationship, because it's not the same relationship. If you're going to renew the relationship, you have to have another conversation. And that's not an easy conversation, right? Yes?
So after you get to step 4,
Yes?
and you've processed all those, and the other person doesn't want to have any contact with you, let's say it's family, which makes it even more difficult,
Right.
or family members. Besides being open and forgiving and loving to reconciliation, how do you deal with the pain? How do you justify that pain?
How do you justify that pain?
How do you deal with the pain? How do you process that? The pain of being open,
Right.
and yet your arms are open, your heart is open, and yet their arms and their heart is closed.
So that's a whole other question, and it's a question of resilience, because it has to do not only with that kind of pain, but pain when you suffer a loss of a loved one, pain of betrayal, we can, and that there's a longer answer to that than I want to go into right now, but it has to do with, coming here is good. It has to do with having a spiritual practice. It has to do with being part of a community of mutual support. It's like, how do you deal with any kind of trauma in your life? Is surrounding yourself both with your spiritual practice, with a worldview that's beneficial, right thinking, and a community of support. But I don't want to go sort of deeper down that road at this point. Yes?
I just had a question about Satan and just the idea of Satan or the archetype, and question about that and how kind of what that looks like maybe for you. Is it more just an archetype within us, or is there an actual devil or Satan situation going on, or like just the awareness? And then the other thing, just about being a priest. I guess just my curiosity would be for you specifically is could you do your work in this world just without the garb and the persona, or is that just where you feel most at home?
So let me answer the second question first. I can do this without the garb. I can do this without this. I like this for the shock value when I sit in the room. It would not be nearly as fun a ride if I had my jeans and a t-shirt. Yeah, whatever, he's a priest, right? But so there are like times when it strategically helps. But I don't need this. I do need the religion. And the reason I need the religion is because I can't do this on my own. I'm a firm believer that most of us need something more than ourselves. And it doesn't have to be my religion, but what I get in a religion is a heritage, right? I get a lineage. I get a set of teachings. I get scriptures that some I like and some rub me the wrong way, and I have to sort of wrestle with them. Like if I just had to pick and choose and just picked the scriptures that fit me, then what I would end up with is me. And I want to end up with something other than me. Like I want to end up with something more than me. So I need a tradition, I need scriptures, I need things I disagree with, I need people in a community. I need people that have my back in a community, and I need people that drive me crazy in a community. And if you want to practice forgiveness a lot, join a church. Just saying. So, right? It's like this gym. It's a gym for spirituality. You get to learn forgiveness, but if there's this overarching teaching about love and anyway, so that I need the religion, right? Because left to my own devices, I'm watching Netflix. So that's that. I want to think if I want to talk about. So let me just say, the root word for the word devil is divide. The devil is in the business of dividing. And so you can say, now, I don't know. I don't know if there's a devil or if it's just this force, but there's this force of division in creation. There's this force of division. There's this force that seeks to divide. And for me, I care less ontologically about it. Like, is it real? How do we diagnose the reality of it? I care more diagnostically. If anything divides, it's of the devil. That's a great diagnostic tool. Right?
Yeah.
Anything that is dividing people is of the devil.
Wow.
Right? Fox News, of the devil. The fact that you laughed at that, of the devil. Right? Because the reason we laugh at it is because we want to be judgy, that we're not like that. And I realize I use that even though there might be people here who love Fox News, and I apologize for using that as the example rather than Rachel Maddow, but I usually play a little better in this room. But the point is that dividing thing, that of the devil thing is so insidious.
I would say the news is
Pardon?
the devil.
Say that.
I think all news right now is pretty much
Well,
the
the-
devil and creating a huge sense of divisiveness.
Right.
And it makes me angry every day, and I don't trust any news source, quite honestly, because I think they're all biased.
Right.
So I'm not.
So for me, I'm less interested in debating whether or not something is real, to what extent. I'm more interested in it just is a great diagnostic tool. And it's great language too. Right? It's of the devil. There you have it. So yes. I'm sorry.
So, I have a question about like boundaries and
Yes.
when like you stay or do you go. So I get that everyone's paralyzed and doing the best they can, and you need to not judge them and love them. But how do you know? Because you talked about it's okay to like step back and say, yeah, I can't handle that, and set boundaries. How do you judge when that is and when you still show them compassion?
I have no idea. You talk to your best friends, probably, or your priest.
You know my priest.
But that's a case by case kind of thing that you need to wrestle with. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to offer up something that, when you're talking about forgiveness, that's been really helpful for me to look at it from the perspective of that forgiveness is sometimes my need to have to be right about what happened. And so as long as I'm hooked in that, then I won't be able to forgive. And it's not making what the wrong was, whether it was right or wrong is not the issue. It's just that it comes back to me to take responsibility for the forgiveness of the situation.
Right. Yes, thank you. So it hooks into our own sort of self-righteousness and need to have power over by being right. Yeah.
Okay, this might be a little off topic weird, but do you believe in possession? Because my friend from 3rd grade is now hearing, she believes that she is possessed. And she's hearing voices that are not hers. They're demons, she says. I know it sounds, maybe
So-
I've been wanting to talk to a priest like the past 2 weeks. It's just so weird that you're here. I was Googling priests and
So let me give you an answer that will likely be dissatisfying.
Okay.
Because I don't know if you know this, but I am destined to disappoint you. The unsatisfying answer is two things. One is I'm an agnostic about that. Like, I don't know. The other is, in my life as a priest, I have encountered spiritual things and people with stories that I believe are true, right? That are beyond my imagining, right? So what I believe to be true is the world is much more mysterious and infused with spirit than I know. And I function sort of in this place of spiritual ignorance, spiritual agnosticism, as I'm trying to make my way through. So the answer to your question from me is I don't know, but I certainly wouldn't discount it as not being possible.
So you don't do exorcisms?
No. In my tradition, there's this, we have this, all of our services are very ritualized, like a Roman Catholic in a book. And there's like one sentence on an exorcism, and that is that if someone asks you for an exorcism, call the bishop. Now, if I were to ever call the bishop would go, holy shit, I don't know what to do. They don't teach that in bishop school. So, I don't. Sorry. So I want to say one other thing about this judgment thing. Okay, I think we're good on time. And then we're going to move to life is difficult. So we're going to move into fear. So So now we're finishing up judgment and we're going to move into fear, which is the other thing. So judgment. At the temple at Burning Man. So who here has been to Burning Man? Okay. Thank you. So every year at Burning Man, there are two major structures created by the organization. One is the man, which is this huge effigy, and the other is the temple. And the temple, I would argue that the temple is the most popular thing at Burning Man. I think probably everyone goes to the temple. Many people go to the temple multiple times. And there are lots of times when there are more people at the temple than anywhere else. And the temple is this beautiful, large structure created by a different artist each year. And people go and they write on the walls. And they bring mementos. And they write prayers and laments and confession. And they bring ashes and they bring photographs. And like anything you could imagine in the human heart is there. There are a lot of forgive me, I'm sorry. There are a lot of, rest in peace, I miss you. There was one a couple years ago, there was this photograph of an older gentleman, and it said, Dad, I miss you now, I miss you always. And then in parentheses at the bottom, she wrote, you would be proud of me. And there was one, people bring wedding dresses, and you don't know the story behind why a wedding dress is at the temple. And once there was this black chalkboard, this big, and in white ink at the very top, in bold letters, it said, fuck you. And it said, fuck you men who raped me. Fuck you judge who didn't believe me. Fuck you police. And it just went on and on and on in this heart-wrenching screed with no resolution. There were others, like, I forgive you men who raped me. And it's, people go and they write, people go and just read the prayers and laments that are on the wall, prayer, my mom has cancer. There are always groups of 5 or 6 people huddled and sobbing or praying or having a conversation. Different groups come and do prayers. And so there's this temple where 95% of the time people are on the party bus. Right? But almost everyone makes a pilgrimage to the temple. And then on Saturday night when the man is burned, it's a huge party. Fireworks, everyone's on something. And then Sunday, when the temple is burned, and then Sunday, Saturday, this huge ring of people around the man is burning, and then Sunday, there's this huge ring around the temple, and by then, if 70,000 people go to Burning Man, some leave earlier, by then there's probably 40,000 people. There's a ring of people sitting, there's a ring of people standing, and there's a ring of art cars. 40,000 people around the temple to watch it burn in complete silence for an hour. Right? And you hear sobbing and people holding on to each other, but all of these people who came to Burning Man in many ways to be on the party bus are here and honoring this time. Because, and part of the reason I'm telling you this now is because what unites us as human beings is clearly not our ideology. What unites us as human beings is our brokenness. In that moment, in that circle, we had each other's backs. Right? Because that's the thing that connects us. Because we can connect regardless, right? Regardless of political affiliation, right? Someone loses their child, right? It just doesn't matter. That's the point where we can finally be human with one another, is when we're broken and we're brokenhearted. Keeping that in mind, can be sort of another avenue or vehicle to forgiveness. That we're all struggling with that broken-hearted piece, and we're all just trying to make it through the best we can, and to offer grace. And that to realize that living a life of mercy is a path to joy. So if we were created for joy, one of the paths to experience that joy is the path of mercy and forgiveness and the hard work of keeping your heart loving despite the cruelty of it. Okay, let's take a breath. See, they don't do that in my church.
We can do some alms too.
Yeah. Okay, let's pause there. Just let me see if there are any questions, thoughts, before I move into fear. Yes?
I feel sad that I just found you and you say you're moving.
I know.
I've really struggled with religion and spirituality, confusing the two. I grew up Christian, not really believing, because I don't think there's only one path. And then you spoke about that, and that's like, wait a minute, you can have both, like you can be both. You can have this, a lot of beliefs in Buddhism side, the Buddhist side, but then like you can merge the two, and kind of.
Yes?
But then, where are the churches for like, where have you been and where are there more like that?
Trinity Cathedral on the corner of 27th and Catholic.
I'm so sad that like, and my husband, he's a history buff, can tell you about every religion and knows too much where he doesn't believe and he really questions, and it's like, I feel like finding somebody like you would be so huge for us.
So I'm not like a unicorn.
You feel like it.
Yes.
So let me respond in a couple. Let me present to you a couple other unicorns. One is, so Trinity Cathedral hired me to be their priest 12 years ago. I've been teaching there for 12 years, so they've been Brianized. Right, for 12 years they've been drinking this particular Kool-Aid, and it's not like this particular Kool-Aid is that different from other Episcopal priests. Okay, and I think on the 17th of this month, Trinity Cathedral is hosting a live video feed with the Dalai Lama, so you can go there and ask the Dalai Lama your questions. So it is a place that I think it's the 17th. Sometimes it's not. It's not that it's important. That was a joke.
Dalai Lama over there.
But anyway, so that, and we host a Buddhist group. It's like, so anyway, I'm not a unicorn. There are other unicorns out there. I'm also happy to connect via, email or Facebook or my blog or whatever. Okay, so there's that. And there's lots of teachings on my blog. The Jesus and the Gays that was a big deal. Teaching on my blog.
We did that here, didn't we do that here?
Yeah, I did that here. Jesus and the Gays, back when that was a big deal. The other is, Christians are really, the liberal Christians are getting more involved in social justice issues. Right? So one area of unicorniness, right, is Christians, Buddhists dancing together. The other area of unicorniness is the church really stepping up and making a progressive stand on social issues. And in fact, last Ash Wednesday, a month ago, a group of leaders from all these different more progressive organizations and denominations, like national leaders, created this statement It's very powerful, and I would be happy to share it through Anne Marie with the class. It's called Reclaiming Jesus, and it has these paragraphs of a faith statement, like we believe all humans are created in the image of God, and then after that, therefore we reject, and then it goes by rejecting, hating foreigners or aliens, and then there's one about misogyny being bad. Imagine that. But if you're wrestling with like where are the churches in this debate, that's another helpful thing, just to let you know that this is not, you just haven't encountered it.
Yeah, not at all.
Okay.
This is refreshing, thank you.
Yep. Yes.
With what you were saying about forgiveness and judgment, it really resonated with me because I personally am an extreme person. I will go extremely into seeing someone's light, but I always hold like this little backpack of all these little judgments that I could, use as like an arsenal. But what really resonated was like, in yoga we say like walk the middle path, and the middle path is boundaries for me. Like I have to find that middle path of the boundaries, and so I just appreciated that so much.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So one big thing that gets in the way, like what is it, the fatal flaw? Is that? Yes, one fatal flaw is our judgment and our judginess and the work of the devil, being into all the dividing things. Oh, another thing to say about that is I believe like the Christian spiritual path, Jesus is all about reconciliation, all about bringing together. Right? So for me, things that do this are of God and things that do this are of the devil. Okay. Fear. So let me talk about the life is difficult part. Life is difficult. It's really, really hard. There's a quotation by Frederick Buechner. In any small town, there's enough grief to freeze your blood. And it's true. God's plan, nature's plan, is we all die. And if you're lucky, someone you love will die. Right? That's it. That's the reality of existence. Is that we all die. And unless you die soon, someone you love is going to die. If you love. If you love. So, there's a lot of reason to be afraid. Because life is really hard. And I'm going to say some things about how strategies for moving beyond fear. And there are people, and there's like different kinds of fear. Like there's the fear that paralyzes most of us, which is an illusion. Okay, we're going to talk about that. Then there's the fear for people whose monsters are real. And I don't want to minimize that. Like, we're going to talk less about that. Like, there are people whose monsters are real, and they need to be afraid. And being afraid is keeping them alive. So we're not talking about minimizing that fear. We're talking about minimizing the neurotic fear that keeps us in prison from living our lives. Okay, so if you're living a life where your monster is real, it's like forgiving the abuser. Like, it's not this isn't about that. So if your monsters are real and you're feeling fear, then that's a good thing, right? Because it's a natural response and it's maybe keeping you alive. So I just want to do that disclaimer. That we're talking about a different thing. want to get back to scarcity thinking. I want to talk about fear first. Okay, so there's healthy fear and unhealthy fear. Healthy fear is when your monsters are real. When something is happening and you need to be afraid and you need your adrenaline response to kick in, and you need to take an action, that's healthy fear. The sort of warning sign fear. And there's unhealthy fear. And that's unhealthy fear is, it constricts our hearts, it constricts our lovingness. Like when we're in a place of fear and that's what's happening politically, like you play the fear card and people's hearts shrink, they become less compassionate because when we're afraid, we sort of circle our wagons, we become more constricted, and it also limits our options. We're less creative and open. Now, let me go back to the healthy and unhealthy fear. I would say I don't know anything, so don't take my word for it, but I think there are three kinds of fear. One fear is like something bad is happening and you're afraid and you need to run away. The other kind of fear on the other end of the spectrum is unhealthy fear, like you're afraid of something that is just not going to happen. In between is the fear, it's the real fear, it's healthy fear, but you can't see the thing that you're afraid of. Like this, my first job as a priest was as a chaplain in an Episcopal elementary school. And one of the things we did to teach children to be safe was to trust their gut. Right? That's the real fear that doesn't look like real fear. Right? But you're in the arcade and someone comes up to you and is having a conversation with you and your gut is saying, this isn't safe. So you don't want to dismiss that. That's real fear, but you can't see what it's real fear about. Okay, so I just want to think that. Okay. So let me talk about fear that doesn't have a reason. Fear that doesn't have a rational basis. Like there's not a bear coming at you, and you're afraid. There's some things that are helpful to think about when you think about fear. One is it's a fiction. What you do when you're afraid is you take your present circumstance, which is real, and then you create this fiction out in the future. It's a fiction that you made up that you then treat as if it's real. You allow it to hurt you and to shrink your heart, to limit your horizons, to limit your options, as if it's real when it's not. So it's helpful to think about fear. Like fear in terms of it's a fiction. It's helpful to know that we as humans have a tendency to overestimate risk and to catastrophize. So we overestimate often the likelihood that the bad thing we're imagining is going to happen, and then we catastrophize. And we think if the bad thing happens, it's going to be so bad. Which makes our heart is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, and we're lowering and lowering our options. So in this, it's just like the judgy thing, to pay attention to your thoughts when that fear starts to kick up and analyze it and say, am I afraid of something that's really happening? Or am I projecting something in my future and assuming it's going to happen and then catastrophize how terrible it's going to be? So to pay attention to your thoughts and once again realize you're not your thoughts. That's just this crazy monkey mind having its way with you. The other thing to keep in mind, this is to help get at catastrophizing. Even when the bad thing happens, like this is the thing. In the present moment, you're okay. Like when you're afraid something's going to happen, in the present moment, you're okay. Like you're making it through. You have the resources and the resiliency and you're fine. You're in control of your life, but it's this thing out there. But in the present moment, you're okay. And if the thing out there happens, think of the times like when the bad thing happened. In the present moment, you were okay. the thing that's robbing you of life isn't the present moment. It's the way you're allowing your imagination to crap all over you. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
In the present moment, you're making it. And if you just realize, even if that thing happens, in the present moment, I'm going to be okay. My favorite teaching on fear is from T.E. Lawrence of Arabia. And he wrote in his 7 Pillars of Wisdom, which is not a book I recommend. He wrote about fear. He said, before you go into the desert, the night before you go into the desert, you can't sleep. And you're up all night long, just imagining all of the horrible things that could possibly happen. You know, what if you get lost? What if you run out of water? What if the wild beasts attack you? What if your guide turns on you and kills you? What if you're attacked by an enemy? Like all of the things, you're just tossing and turning. You're not sleeping. And then when you go into the desert, one of two things happens. Either, it's not nearly as bad as you imagined. You wasted a good night's sleep conjuring up all of these things. Or it's far worse than you imagined. You weren't creative enough. And in that case, you will find resources in yourself that you never knew existed. Right?
Yeah.
So our society is being ripped apart by fear. And we're allowing ourselves to be manipulated and used by fear. And the invitation, if you're going to be an agent of love and reconciliation in the world, is to check yourself and pay attention to this inner voice of fear that's robbing you of your life. And you can imagine your life if you lived your life without judgment and without fear. Imagine how freeing that would be. To live your life without judgment and without fear. Yes?
Would that correlate at all with not having expectations?
Yes. That's a part of it, is to not build up, not create expectations that you're either going to be disappointed or not by. But I want to back up and say something about judgment. Because I was just remembering a conversation with Lama Baruch. There's a difference when I said the phrase, imagine living your life without judgment and without fear. There's a difference between being judgy and making judgments. There's a difference between being judgy and discerning. Like we have to go through our lives and constantly be discerning. That's different, right, than that voice of judginess that kicks in. I just want to make sure we're clear on the distinction. Right? You're going to go through your life making judgments all the time about this thing or that thing, or should I leave the person or not leave the person. But that's different than that judgy piece. Let me say one more thing about fear. Let me talk about God first. I want to talk about faith. I want to talk about God. I want to talk about faith. I want to talk about resurrection and how this all connects with fear. So, this is where I was thinking about going when the Satan question came up. I want to talk about God. I want to tell you about my understanding of God. I graduated from high school in '79. Why that matters is Star Wars. So, just so we can sort of place my emotional and spiritual upbringing in the scale of important things. Star Wars, was it 78, the first Star Wars? Somewhere around there. 77. Anyway, so before I ever went to church, I went to Star Wars. And the notion of this force of good, like this force of light being in creation. That's sort of deeply rooted in me. And for me, God isn't like this individual being making decisions to whom we pray, and if we pray right, we get our wishes granted. That's not for me what God is. For me, God is the force of light that pulses through creation that will not be denied. Such that after every forest fire, the color purple. Right? God is the force of love that pulses through creation. The force of love that inspires people to act out of their better selves, if we can tap into it. When Martin Luther King said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice," God is the gravitational pull. For me, as I've grown spiritually, my faith in God has grown deeper. Like, I know God is. My understanding of what God is has grown more diffuse. Which is why I don't need to throw stones at Buddhists. Right? I'm pretty agnostic about what God is. I'm not agnostic about God is. Okay? There is this power, this force in life, this force of love, this force of life, pulsing through creation, drawing the arc of the moral universe toward wholeness and toward love and toward justice. And we have the opportunity to participate in that or not. And if we participate in it, if enough of us participate in it, maybe the arc of the moral universe will bend a little more quickly. But it's the act of participating, like in the Taoist sense of being in the way, being in the flow of things, participating in God. Now, there are a couple of facets about God. One is the Trinity. Part of what I'm doing, there are things that bug me about my religion, but I kept them because it was my religion, and then eventually I'm like, oh, wow, that's really smart. Who knew? And one of them is the Trinity. And the Trinity, it seems sort of just odd. And what the Trinity is saying is there's one God. There's one God. There's one God. There's one God. And there are three gods, by the way. There are three persons of the Trinity. And that both of those are true. There's only one God, and there are three persons of the Trinity. And it sort of seemed odd, like why 3 and not 7 or 2 I just wrestled with why it seemed like. But and part of why I was drawn toward it, like I didn't let go of it. One is in my job. The other is I want a model of God that I can't understand. Like I want a model of God that's more mysterious than my brain, because if it fits in my brain, then uh-oh. But the thing I began to fall in love with the idea of the Trinity is it's communal in nature. Like and there's this fancy Greek word, parakaryosis, and that is the three persons of the Trinity are always in this constant dance of love with one another. And that in the Godhead is community. Like it's not one God all alone, but the essence of creation is God, and the essence of God is communion, is communality, it's love that's shared between persons. And at Trinity Cathedral, where I worship, there's this icon that has 3 women that are it's either an icon of the Trinity, it's often seen as an icon of the Trinity, at a table with the fourth side of the table open for the viewer. So the invitation is for you to enter into the Trinity, into this relationship of communality with God. So part of why it's important, like the reason I care about the Trinity, is it's saying the essence of creation is communality. It's communion. It's community. You were not created to be alone. and that's in your spiritual DNA. That's what that idea of the Trinity is foundational for. It helps you get that, right? So God not only is this power of life and love and gravitational pull toward justice, God is also the essence of communion and communality, and we're called to be into that, okay, to be connected with that. Now, let me talk, yes?
So you mentioned like a commonality, like everyone's pull
Yes.
towards that. So I believe I'm assuming in your theology, you think that Jesus is the only way. So how do you compromise that with everyone, pulsing to
Okay,
God?
so first of all, your assumption is wrong.
Okay.
And secondly, please hold on to that. Because I want to address that Jesus is the only way thing.
Yeah.
I want to address that. Okay, but don't let me forget it, because I'm heading in this direction and I want to make sure I get to that direction. Is that cool?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So, God. So we got God is love, God is life, God is bending toward justice, God is also communality, God is connectionness. Okay, now Jesus. This is all getting toward here. This is one of the things. You can say that Jesus came to free us of judgment. You can, like when Jesus saves, what is Jesus saving us from? Jesus is not saving us from a wrathful God. Jesus is saving us from ourselves. And Jesus is saving us from our judginess. So that's we did the first part. Jesus is also saving us from being gripped in fear. So Jesus comes along and he says, don't worry. Which doesn't work. But he says it anyway. Because then we can refer back to it as we get a little further along. He says, don't worry about what you're going to wear, what you're going to eat. It's all going to be okay. Just chill. He does that, and that doesn't work, but he tells people not to be afraid. Oh, what is the first thing that angels in the Bible, when angels come and see people, what's the first thing they say?
Don't be afraid.
Right, don't be afraid. And that's either because angels are that scary, or it's what we need to hear the most. Don't be afraid. So Jesus comes, he says, don't be afraid, don't worry. And then what he does is Jesus experiences everything that we're afraid of. He experiences being betrayed and stripped naked in public and humiliated and beaten and tortured and scorned and executed. And in all of that, on the other side of it is resurrection, is new life. Because I believe God's primary job is creating life. It's what God does. And that on the other side, of this, so we have this story of crucifixion. And saying that on the other side of whatever it is you're afraid of, God is there, like fingers in the ashes, creating new life. And it's something new and different than you ever imagined. It's not a repeat. It's something new and different. And one of the reasons I believe resurrection is true is because I've seen it. I've seen it in the ways, like if the thing you're afraid of, and the thing happens, and on the end of it, you're a new creation. And it's not like you ever want the thing to happen, but it's going to happen. And you can either go through your life like this, like please don't happen, please don't happen, please don't happen. Or you can go through your life like this. Bring it on. It's going to happen. And I know it's going to suck. And it's going to hurt like hell. And I'm going to be okay. Right? That's what I've seen again and again and again and again. And because I've seen that again, like I see it in creation with forest fires. I see it in people's lives. And what Jesus is trying to do is say, stop letting that fear close you down from your loving heart. Life is hard and it will hurt you. And you will be okay. And you'll be better than okay. So open your heart and live it.
Amen.
Now, so for me, that's one of the, that's a main thing Jesus came to teach. Like, stop doing this. Do this. And by the way, if you do this, you will create community. Community creates resilience. So if you do this, you're going to be all alone, or you'll be with your other sad people doing it. If you do this, you're going to be part of a resilient community, so when the bad thing happens, you'll be even better. Right? The less afraid you are, the better you're going to be. Like the quicker resurrection is going to happen if you live your life like this. So live your life like this. Now it helps to live your life like this if you have faith. Now I'm not saying you got to have my religion, although it's good. My favorite definition of faith, by a guy named John Shea, is faith is holding in memory those experiences that give warrant to hope. Faith is holding in memory those experiences that give warrant to hope. Now, you have different kinds of experiences. You have experiences that give warrant to hope, and you have experiences that give warrant to not hope. And you can choose. Faith, according to John Shea, is to hold in memory those things. Like, I made it through in the past. I'm going to make it through again. That's what faith is. I've encountered love in the past. However you want to define it, but to hold in memory those things. And you have a choice, but you're going to be a better person if you hold in memory those things that give warrant to hope. Okay? If you hold those in memory, then fear becomes less. Because you can see, you see the hints of resurrection. You see the hints of life pulsing through the dark times. You can see it in hindsight. And rather than, it's the opposite of fear. Fear, you take all the bad things and you project it forward. In this definition of faith, you take the good things in your past and you project that forward. And that's more real than the fear. So this time and this time and this time, things fell apart and I was okay. So that time in the future, even if the bad thing happens, I'm going to be okay. So for me, the model of Jesus going to the cross, knowing it's going to hurt like hell, and it's going to be okay, and he's going to love the people crucifying him. He's going to forgive the people crucifying him. He kept an open, supple, loving heart regardless of the cruelty of others. For me, that's the way of Jesus. The way of Jesus is to keep your heart loving, to love others, be an agent of love in the world, and not let the cruelty of other people rob you of that. That's the way of Jesus. And by the way, it's the only way. But you don't have to be a Christian to walk in the way of Jesus. For me, it's the path that I've chosen that helps teach me to walk in that way. That, when Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, no one comes to the Father except by me, Jesus is talking about the way of Jesus. And what's the way of Jesus? The way of Jesus is the way of love, regardless of people putting nails in your hands. And it's not the way of letting people, it's like firm boundaries. This is what it means to be loved. I'm going to sacrifice myself. I'm going to pour myself out in love for the world. So, let me pause there. Okay, I'm going to have to hustle. So, I talked about the path of joy being, a path of joy is mercy. Another path of joy is striving. And that's part of this, not fear. Life is hard, bring it on. Which is different than life is hard, I'm going to hide. Life is hard, bring it on is the path of joy. Life is hard, bring it on, and I'm going to stay loving while I'm doing it. That's the path of joy. And you know, like you're at Zuda, right? So you know striving is good. Like, if I just lived my life watching Netflix, it would be far less fulfilling than showing up and striving and struggling. And then one of the final things that I want to say is the part right now the invitation right now, culturally, socially, for the sake of our world, is the invitation to give a damn about the people who are struggling. Because there are people whose monsters are real. And their monsters are becoming real. And the invitation is, get on your mat. Yes. But get off your mat. And go into the world and be an agent of reconciliation. And you do that. One, I'm going to give you 3 steps. One is you listen for the cry of the poor, or the oppressed, or the struggling, or the victim. You listen, and listen, and listen. Because we have this crazy, we think we know. And we don't. And one of the things after Charlottesville that we did at Trinity Cathedral was, I knew we needed to have conversations about race and racism. But I always felt like I wasn't qualified, right? Because I'm, in all ways, a part of the dominant culture. And then something happened after Charlottesville. We had sort of recurring, Ferguson, we sort of moved a little further, and then, we kept moving forward. And then Charlottesville, it was like, we decided as a congregation that we needed to learn about race and racism. And we read a book called America's Original Sin, Racism, White Privilege, and a Bridge to a New America by a guy named Jim Wallace, who's an evangelical Christian. We had a Thursday night class and a Sunday morning class. Thursday night class was all white people. And the reason I had this class years earlier was I was thinking, I can't have this class and not have people of color part of it. And people were asking that question when they came to the class. And what I realized was, before we can create a community that's safe for people of color and have the conversation, we have homework to do. And we read the book. And now we're doing more and more. But for me, a part of that we're being called to do right now is to listen, which means learn or read a book or do something where you can understand the plight of the people that you're wanting to engage with. Be it around, immigration or poverty or race or something. Right? Don't just assume you know what the issue is. And mine, because I'm white and a guy and a priest and I know everything, I just assume that my opinion is right when it's not really based on conversation or a lot of hard work on my part. Right? So step 1 is to listen and learn. Step 2 is to show up. There are lots of ways to show up. And then step 3 is stay loving. There are lots of ways of showing up. Showing up can be a path to hell. Right? If you're just joining the fight, to shout at the other people about how wrong they are. Okay? So for me, right now, so when I gave this talk before, it stopped before I started this part. And now that I'm giving this talk, now I'm doing this piece about the world's on fire and we need to give a damn. And we need to give a damn starting by listening and learning and understanding what's really going on and why are people struggling, or hear the cry of the poor and the outcast and the oppressed. Like, step in the breach and stay loving. For me, that's the answer. Like, that's how we live into that blessing. It's how your love changes everything. And that's why I'm here. Because I believe that your love, that our love can change everything. And I am enlisting allies. I am evangelical about allies. Thank you, Anne-Marie.
Love you.
Thank you. So we have about 15 more minutes. What questions do you have, or thoughts, or responses, or reactions? And was there a question unanswered? Did I answer you?
No, that was great, thank you.
Okay. I didn't know it was going to weave in that way. You asked it at the perfect time. So. Yeah.
I guess just about spiritual advancement and potential falling. Do you have any thoughts around that?
I don't understand the question.
I guess just as you advance and grow spiritually, you come more into your own power, and more into your own awareness, the potential of, for example, Darth Vader or whatever. Is that just some thoughts around that?
Well, I mean, there's always, for me, that's why I need community. And part of what community does is hold each other accountable. The risk is greater the more isolated I am, the more I like living in here rather than like this, the greater risk of, when I fall, right, you're gonna fall. It's when you fall, whether or not you just keep rolling down the hill, or you have people who catch you and hold you accountable and say, that's not okay, what you're doing.
One of my favorite things, quotes, which I'm sure you probably know, is that God comes to the hungry in the form of food. And so whenever anything is going wrong, challenging me, I just like to say, okay, what is the bigger picture, and how is he coming to me in this way, like what's the source here? So I just...
And that's another thing about religion, is that it knits you into a bigger picture. Like you're part of a bigger, like you have a bigger goal, or you're part of a bigger community rather than being on your own. Yes?
Two questions. One is a semantical question. So it's just out of curiosity, and going back into my memories if I remember, is transubstantiation, is that what it's, the Trinity? Is that?
No, transubstantiation has to do with what happens to the bread.
Oh, okay. I
It
can remember.
becomes
Okay,
like
that was just
real Jesus.
I was going back in my memory trying to remember these.
Right.
And then the other one was I just wanted to thank you for. I just think it's really wonderful because I know your church, along with other churches in Sacramento, have been really a force for the progressive movement. And I belong to a church that's, you're part of that, the group that works together.
Right.
And it's just really nice because I think it's so hypocritical if you have a church and you're not accepting. So I'm just really thankful that you guys have opened. It's been a struggle for your church, I know that. But I'm just thankful to hear that love is love. And that's important.
Thanks. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. I feel like you've connected a lot of dots for what we've been talking about over the past 6 weeks. And one thing that really resonated with me is this idea of, just imagining living life without judgment or fear. And I think, I don't want to speak for everyone, but that's something that's come up a lot through this training. And it's something that I think we all strive toward. And I personally haven't met anyone who lives in that space. Or if they do, we haven't had that conversation. And I'm curious, can you arrive in that space, or is it always a process?
Well, I think that's a question you just saved for the Dalai Lama. For me, it's a process.
I won't judge myself.
Yes, exactly. The gentleman in the red shirt.
I am loving awareness.
What do you believe about death and eternity?
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That's a great question. So I'm a firm believer in resurrection. What it looks like, I have no idea. I have not been able to see beyond the veil. The other thing I'm agnostic about, so this whole notion of hell. So I'm agnostic, like I believe in resurrection. I just have no idea what it is. And the reason I believe in resurrection is because I've been connected, like, to a force of life and a force of love that I believe that I am held in a love that will not let me go, a love that is stronger than death. Okay, I believe that. I don't know what that means, like what that looks like on the other side of death. The other thing that factors into this is that the notion that people conjure in their brains when they hear the word hell, I do not believe is in the Bible. The word that is translated hell, literally, is Gehenna. And Gehenna was the name of the trash dump just outside of Jerusalem. And it's where fire was burning, like the trash is burning all the time, and there are maggots and worms. And so what Jesus is saying is if you don't change the way you're living in life, you're going to end up in Gehenna. Which is true. Right? And and where the fire is never extinguished and the worm never dies. Right? If you don't change the way you're living your life, you're going to end up in Gehenna. And for me, it has nothing, it is true, and it has to do with how we're living in hell now. And it has nothing to do with what happens after we die. Who hasn't asked a question yet? Go ahead.
I just wanted to say thank you. I grew up in a really Christian home. I actually currently teach in a church on Wednesday nights, and but I don't really hold, I haven't considered myself a Christian in a while. So I'm not saying I would again, but thank you for giving me the permission to be okay with what I've always believed and where I am now. So I just really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And yes.
I feel like through this talk, I've had a lot of things come together. Whereas at first with religion, it's all been very separate. My grandparents told me when I was 5 I was going to hell because I wasn't raised where you go to church on Sunday. So that just meant I would be in flames in a bad way. But I knew in my heart there was something more. And everything that you said about faith and love just landed so much in my body. And your idea of hell landed with me. And I'm much more comfortable with that than the idea that was put in my head. So I just want to
cool.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
My question is, I've experienced other religions or people within religions being weirded out by the yogi community about doing it. What's that about? Why is that, from your perspective?
Well, I really can't comment on why other people are the way they are.
Have you ever seen an example of that or had a conversation where someone's been against yoga because of their religion?
I don't know if I've ever had a conversation I know that, and that's part of why, that's kind of the genesis of the first time I got invited here, was Anne-Marie and Bill thought it might be nice, because there are Christians in here that wonder, can I be a Christian and do yoga? All of you are going to teach a yoga class where there are Christians and they're thinking whether or not it's compatible. So they figured, why not have the priest come and say yes? And since I did, that took about 7 seconds and I had 2 hours to fill, I just told them other stuff. But it just has to do with different people's perspectives on, whether religion is narrow and exclusive or open and expansive.
Yeah, it's just, I guess, maybe more of a cultural commentary.
Yeah. Yes.
Is there room in your Burning Man camp?
Say again?
Is there room in your Burning Man camp?
Yes, there is.
Can I go?
Oh, please do. Yeah, we have, It's our first year. We have 8 campers so far, and I'm hoping for 10 to 12. So yeah, there's room in our camp.
Awesome.
And we do services at the temple. We'll do some services at our camp. We did service 2 years now. We've done services at the temple and bless people. Do a lot of blessing. So cool. Yes.
Have you always been like certain of your faith? Because it seems like to have such a wide perspective as you had, there had to be like some questioning and some like searching, and how did you find your way back? If so, and how did you stay in it?
Well, I've always questioned so I became a Christian at West Point. My journey, so I became a Christian at West Point. I was in the Army. I was in a fairly sort of structured environment, and my introduction to Christianity was pretty sort of evangelical and like this, but I had this tender heart, and I had this foundational experience of love that always questioned it. And the blessing for me is I landed in the Episcopal Church. And every time I thought like I was being just crazy in my thinking, I would go to some Episcopal conference and realize I was behind the power curve. Right? And when I thought, oh my goodness, like maybe it's okay to be gay, and I would go and encounter all these gay priests, and I'm like, oh, okay. So for me, it's been my own, the wrestling between what I was taught to believe and what my heart was always pushing to be more accepting and more liberal, and it wasn't the church that was keeping me in, it was sort of my own interpretation of things that was keeping me in, and the way I read the Bible. I want to give you a hint, all right? Here's a tip. I say 2 things about how to read the Bible. One is, I have 3 shelves in my brain where I put Bible passages. One is the yes shelf, right? Love your neighbors. Yes, or even love your enemies. I know it's true, I just can't do it. So there's the yes shelf. There's the no shelf. And the no shelf I try to make as small as possible. And those are the things I know aren't true. That I know are a reflection of the culture of the time, but it's not like word of the Lord. Like slaves obey your masters. That goes on the no shelf. But then the biggest shelf is the agnostic shelf. And the Adam and Eve story lived on that shelf for the longest time. It was like, I don't like this story. I don't like the way it's been used. It doesn't make sense to me. But I can't put it on the no shelf. Like, I'm not smart enough to say why this isn't, right? So it just stays in the agnostic shelf. And every couple of years I pull it off and look at it and go, that still doesn't work. So that's one thing, is to allow this big agnostic shelf and to allow a no shelf. The other thing, and this is how I approach the Bible, how I approach liturgy, is to ask the question, in what way is this true? So much of the time we hear something and we say, that's wrong. Well, yeah, but it's also half right. Like most things, everything I've told you is half right. But to approach it in what way, like how is this passage trying to teach me something? Even though I don't like it, or I wrestle with it, or it's awkward or clumsy, what in here is true that I can hold on to? And then what happens in those things in the agnostic shelf, this part might be true, and then it just grows and grows and grows, and I grow into it. So anyway, that's a bonus lesson on how to read the Bible. Yes.
I hear a question about what is considered the canonical Bible text. I mean, like from a historical point, there's so much that's cut out of that, and that was predetermined by a very specific socioeconomical male group. And so I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about that, or how you dealt with that. I'm sure that has to have come up at some point in time.
So, I care and I don't care. So let me start with I don't care. I don't care because, and this is going to sound weird, but this is how my brain works. I don't care because the scripture, like my team is using this set of scriptures. And by constraining myself to this set of scriptures in one way, like saying most of our teachings come out of this, it's like I could also be on the team that says my canon is Shakespeare. And I'm going to take everything I believe from Shakespeare. And I could create a good life on that. Right? And there are other good things that could be in that canon. But I'm on the team that wrestles over this. And as we wrestle over it, we create a community that wrestles over this. And yes, if the deciders had made the book this or this, we would be wrestling over this and this. But this is the uniform we put on, and this is what we wrestle with, and it works for me. So in that sense, I don't care about the politics that went into the choosing of the books. All I know is that these books have worked to bring me alive. At the same time, I care about the Gospel of Thomas. I read apocryphal books. I read books that didn't make it. They're interesting. They're informational. I might even throw them into a sermon. So it's sort of I'm open to it. But my team has been wearing these colors for so long. I like these colors. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but I'm less interested. I'm less interested in the debate of, did Jesus really say this or not? Or was it written by the authors? Or do we want to care about these books versus these books? All I know is that if I put my faith in these books, I become a better person. If I study them with the 3 shelves and what in here is beneficial to me, it brings me along. So I'm not going to say the church sucks because their books were made bad. It's some of those arguments are helpful and valid, but often they're used just to dismiss the whole thing. Okay, we have no minutes left. I want to thank you all very, very much.